Once again, Russia is at it. Particularly in the Baltic region, its fighter jets just can't manage to keep out of airspace where they have no business being. And this is especially true. On numerous occasions, those jets fly without any prior warning, violating the airspace of other countries while they are on covert missions to carry out whatever it is that they are supposed to be doing on behalf of their government. A pair of Italian F-35s have successfully intercepted a Russian Su-24 and Su-27 when they were flying in the airspace of the NATO alliance. However, this time Russia's planes were facing down. United 24 media reported on August 13th that a pair of Italian F-35 fighter jets had scrambled into action to intercept two Russian fighter jets that were flying in area where they shouldn't have been. The question that everyone is asking is, what happens next? Italy was not the location where the jets took off. Instead, they originated from the Mari Air Base in Estonia, from which they traveled to meet the Russian jets that were invading the airspace of the Baltic region. The mission was carried out as a component of the air policing mission that NATO is doing, which will be addressed in further depth throughout the remainder of the film. The deployment of Italy's F-35 represents the first time that these aircraft have been flown in the Baltic region, as stated by the Army's recognition. It is a continuation of the events that occurred a few days earlier when Hungarian Gripen jets were compelled to take to the skies in order to counter a threat posed by Russia. The fact that Russia has become more brazen or perhaps more foolhardy in its efforts to scare the Baltic states and NATO as a whole is demonstrated by the fact that two occurrences of this nature have occurred within a short period of time. This is a step up in the game. The response of NATO to Russia's aerial maneuvers, which are being conducted in order to poke and prod at NATO's forces, is commensurate with the crime. In the event that this leads one to believe that the Russian aircraft were destroyed by a missile attack, then this is not the case. NATO is a lot more intelligent than that. It is not going to be possible for it to launch a conflict with Russia because of jets that are invading the airspace of the alliance. However, because the Russian jets were operating without transponders or flight plans, it is impossible for the United States to enable Russia to get away with such egregious violations of international law. And this is something that the United States must take into consideration. Both are examples of intentional emissions. In the event that either of the jets were to crash land or be captured by another nation, the absence of flight plans guarantees that no one would ever be aware of the specific activities that were taking place on either of them. When it comes to the transponders that have gone missing, these electronic devices enable air traffic controllers to identify and monitor any aircraft that attempts to enter their territory. One can easily understand the reason why the Russian aircraft did not have transponders. It was their intention to remain undetected, but they were unsuccessful. Army recognition says that the Italian F-35 that went to intercept the Russian planes are a part of the quick reaction alert QRA posture that is maintained at the Estonian Amari base. According to Forces News, a QRA is a state of readiness and a modus operandi of air defense that is maintained at all times by NATO allies. NATO aircraft that are operating under a QRA have crews that are ready to take off at a moment's notice and are on standby 24 hours a day. This allows them to serve as the first line of defense against any potential threats that may be approaching. It is possible that this indicates that these jets are engaging targets that are truly attempting to cause harm on land that is under NATO control. On the 13th of August, it was not the circumstance that transpired. Instead, the Italian F-35 took to the sky and flew inside the range of Russia's fighter jets, capable of intercepting them, well aware that they had been rumbled. This is something that the Russian pilots always do when they are in a scenario like this. Back in Russian airspace, they made their escape. Regrettably, it is not known how long Russia's aircraft were flying around Estonia or what they could have been able to learn before the F-35s arrived at their location. What would have happened, however, if Italy's F-35 had done more than just intercept the Russian jets? This is the question that is most important to ask. It would have been a terrible piece of news for Russia. Based on the specifications of the F-35, it appears that the product was manufactured in the United States. According to the website of the United States Air Force, the F-35 is a fifth-generation aerial platform that was meant to replace the F-16 and A-10 Thunderbolts already in use in the United States. In addition to being a multi-role fighter, it is quick and stealthy, and it has been developed with greater survivability so that it can perform multiple roles. Additionally, the F-35 engines are capable of producing 43,000 pounds of torque, which enables the jet to achieve a maximum speed of Mach 1.6. Flight range is not an issue either, as the F-35s are able to go for more than 1,350 miles before requiring refueling. It is even possible for these planes to remain in the air indefinitely, or at the very least for as long as the tankers have fuel to distribute to them if aerial tankers are deployed throughout the route that they are planned to take. The F-35s have a flight ceiling of 50,000 feet and may be carried with a variety of bombs depending on the job that they are required to carry out. Among those weapons is a M61, a two-Balkan cannon, which is a 6-barreled 20mm rotary gun that can rattle off 6,000 rounds per minute, though the typical jet is only equipped with 180 rounds. If the cannon won't do, a F-35 can also carry an array of missiles, including AIM-120 AIM-RAMs, AIM-9X Sidewinders, and GBU-31 Joint Direct Attack munitions. When it comes to dealing with ground targets, the latter are exceptional due to the fact that JDAMs are simply wing kits that are attached to dumb bombs and allow them to deliver devastating explosive force to a target. The AIM-RAMs and Sidewinders would be far more suitable for eliminating other planes in air-to-air combat. And while we are on the subject of other aircraft, neither of the two that Russia launched into NATO airspace on August 13th can be compared to the F-35 or the Su-24 fighter. The Sukhoi is a frontline attack and interceptor jet that entered service in 1975. Making it a jet from the Soviet era. However, it is possible that Russia's pilot was flying a Sukhoi 24-meter, which is an upgraded version of the aircraft that entered service in 1983. Regardless, the Su-24 is significantly older than the F-35, as evidenced by the fact that it is classified as a fourth-generation fighter. The specs of the Su-24 are just halfway satisfactory for a jet of the fourth generation. It is capable of reaching a maximum speed of 1 Mach. This is a quick response, but it is 6 Mach behind the F-35, which means that the Su-24 is not going to be able to escape in a dogfight. Additionally, the jet's range of 652 miles does not compare favorably to that of the F-35. If they wanted, a F-35 pilot could simply chase a Su-24 down, stay out of range of its weapons, and force it to deplete its fuel so that it has to fly out of a combat zone. With regard to its arsenal, the Su-24 is able to transport nuclear warheads, which are not particularly useful in a direct confrontation with an F-35. Additionally, it is able to carry Vimpal R-60IR homing air-to-air missiles and KH-23 guided missiles, a decent aircraft, without a doubt. Yet, when the Su-24 is competing against a fighter jet that is more powerful, faster, and more aware of its location, the Su-27 does not do much better than the Su-24, another aircraft of the fourth generation. The Su-27 entered service in 1984 and was considered a pioneer by the Army at the time. According to the recognition of the military, the jet broke over 40 world records in terms of its takeoff speed, and altitude. However, those records were set decades ago, having said that the jet can hit Mach 2, which is faster than an F-35 and has a higher range at 2,193 miles. Its 30mm cannon is also solid competition for the F-3520mm gun, plus being loaded out with Vimple R-73 and Vimple R-27 air-to-air missiles makes the jet a much more dangerous aerial prospect than the Su-24. If either of Russia's jets were going to put up a fight against the F-35, it's the Su-27. Key Arrow even says that the jet is maneuverable enough to make it decent competition for some fifth-generation fighters. When all of this is taken into consideration, it would appear that the jet is capable of competing rather effectively with the F-35. However, this is not the case. As the national interest emphasized in a piece published in February 2024, the Su-27 is not a match for the F-35, despite the fact that its specifications are great on paper. Aero Corner adds to this by pointing out that the stealth capabilities of the F-35 give it a distinct advantage over the Su-27. Although the Russian jet may be faster and have a greater range, the F-35's low-profile body and materials that can absorb radar signals mean that it could sneak up on the Russian jet in a true aerial engagement. This was not the case on August 13th, however, because NATO wanted to demonstrate to Russia that it could see exactly what its jets were doing. For all intents and purposes, this would not even be considered a dogfight if it were a true case, due to the fact that the F-35 would have approached without being spotted. Neither the Su-24 nor the Su-27 would have been aware of its presence until missiles were flying in their respective directions. In its report on the incident involving the Russian fighter, the Italian F-35 Lightning II provides a generational jump in capacity. Perhaps the simplest way to phrase it is to say that it is recognition from the Army. Because of its stealth profile, superior radar and electro-optical sensors, and the capacity to share data via a network, it is able to identify, classify, and track many threats well before it is discovered. That generational leap, on the other hand, is the factor that makes the difference. It was a terrific time for Russia's jets to be in service. The F-35 is an excellent car for the modern era. According to the United Kingdom Defense Journal, NATO made this point very apparent when it issued a statement regarding the Russian jet interception. This is the reason why they are operating as an essential component of the NATO air policing role that was indicated earlier in the video. In that statement, NATO reportedly discussed how the air policing role is intended to secure alliance airspace and serve as a reassuring measure for countries of NATO who do not possess their own fighter jets, such as Estonia. This was reported by the Journal. During the events that took place on August 13th, the mission demonstrated its capacity to swiftly react to a possible threat. It then goes on to make a claim with regard to the United Kingdom. It was pointed out in the defense newspaper that the air policing mission is entirely defensive, which is another reason why missiles were not flying in the direction of Russia's aircraft. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, offers a few further facts, stressing that the air policing duty is not a novel concept. As a means of defense and deterrent, it was established in 1961 at the height of the Cold War with the intention of serving as a measure. In addition, NATO emphasizes the duties of the operation, which go beyond fighting Russian fighter jets that are violating international law. This objective has not changed, as was observed on August 13th. Airspace integrity protection is a permanent peacetime activity that contributes to the collective defense of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO. It is a clear sign of togetherness, shared responsibility, and solidarity across the alliance, according to NATO, which claims it is a clear sign. Moreover, NATO air policing forces also provide support to civilian aircraft in distress when they've lost communication with air traffic control, for example. In other words, 2 Italian F-35s scrambling to meet a Russian Su-24 and Su-27 are exactly what the air policing mission is designed to do. And when it's not doing that, civilian aircraft can benefit from the mission's ability to quickly respond to issues identified in the skies. That is all well and well, but the real question that needs to be answered today is what the true meaning of Russia's jets entering NATO airspace is. The Economic Times raised a question that seems a little bit out of the ordinary. At the outset of World War III, the headlines that were published about the tragedy were bleeding. Despite the fact that the headline of the Economic Times may have taken the shock and awe approach, it may not be as far off the mark as it initially appears to be. This is because the article does not provide any real reasoning for why this most recent incident is a sign of a new global war. Therefore, it is reasonable to say that World War III is not beginning, in the sense that Russian fighter aircraft are dropping bombs over the Baltic Sea and NATO jets are responding by shooting them out of the sky. It is true that World War III is not yet in its initial stages. Despite appearances to the contrary, the phrase World War III is not as out of place as it may seem. A renowned Russian individual appears to be of the opinion that the world is on the verge of a catastrophe. The statements that Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov delivered during his presentation at the 11th Teresientia National Educational Youth Forum were released on July 28th by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia. Most of these remarks saw Lavrov discuss war, with the key quote being as follows: "Many political scientists, academics, and experts seriously argue that a third world war is not just unavoidable, but is already underway in new forms, beginning with the West aggression against Yugoslavia in 1999, followed by aggression against Iraq, the destruction of Libya, and the attack on Syria. All these Middle Eastern countries are now in a state of turmoil. Of course, there is a healthy dose of Russia playing the game of blaming the West with these remarks. However, the very fact that Lavrov brings up the concept of World War III at all suggests that the thinking in Russia is that such a war is brewing. And if it hasn't already started, the bombs aren't flying between Russia and NATO because it hasn't yet begun. The fact that Russia has sent its jets into NATO airspace, on the other hand, is a clear indication that Russia is collecting information and testing the NATO response. What about a war in the future? It is possible that this is not known for certain. The Week also makes some interesting points in an article that was published in July. The article states that there is already a great deal of violence going on all around the world, which may indicate that World War III is already now in progress. Israel is engaged in a conflict with Iran and a number of different Islamic terrorist sects throughout the Middle East. After all, Russia and NATO are not the only countries in the region. Following an attack on Iran in which it attempted to destroy the nuclear sites of the country, the United States has been engaged in that fight by conducting airstrikes against the Houthis in Yemen. Iran has replied to this attack by conducting a strike against a United States Air Force base in Qatar. The United States of America is the weak party in a trade war that China is now engaged in. Additionally, it is stated that many analysts are of the opinion that China is preparing to invade Taiwan by the year 2027, which would virtually certainly result in the United States of America and other Western allies becoming involved in a fight. To participate in the conflict in Ukraine, North Korea is deploying soldiers to Russia for the purpose of enabling the country to defend itself against Russia and launch attacks on Russian territory. The collective Western world is providing the country with weaponry and military assistance. Now, Russian fighter jets are beginning to infringe on the airspace of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Perhaps the prospect of a third world war is not as exaggerated as it seems. At this very moment, a great number of nations are engaged in conflict, and it appears like the entire world is collectively sitting on a powder keg that is just waiting to blow. The fact that a pair of Russian fighter jets were shot down by an Italian F-35 is not the spark that would light the fuse of that powder keg. Rather, it is yet another illustration of the high tensions that are present in Europe, particularly in the Baltic region. In order to get to the bottom of what Russian jets and Baltic airspace actually imply, it is the region that needs to be zeroed in on immediately. To tell you the truth, the 13th of August is not even close to being the first time something like this has occurred. As was said earlier, the scrambling of hanging was also mentioned. Aerian planes to deal with a similar occurrence only a couple of days before, Italy's F-35 took to the skies, while back in April, the Defense Post reported that a pair of United Kingdom Royal Air Force Typhoons carried out a similar interception mission over the Baltic Sea. Both of these incidents occurred between the months of April and May 2014. A pair of Su-30 MKIs and an IL-20M spying and surveillance aircraft were among the Russian jets that they were compelled to intercept after they were obliged to do so 3 times in the span of 2 days. Moving forward in time to the 28th of June, the Kiev Independent claimed that Germany had once again scrambled its fighter jets over the Baltic Sea in order to once again intercept a Russian Il-20M. Not a single instance of this has occurred. There is a discernible pattern here, both in terms of what Russia is doing and where it is doing it. The Baltic region is a target for Russia, and those who reside in the Baltic states of Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia are aware of this fact. All 3 are former Soviet states, which doesn't bode well given that part of Putin's justification for the Ukraine invasion seems to rest on Ukraine historically being part of Russia in March 2025. The BBC reported that the Baltic states are all trying to Putin-proof themselves amidst fears that any one of them could be next if Russia is victorious in Ukraine. NATO's air policing mission is part of this, as is Estonia's choice to outfit its side of the bridge that separates it from Russia with Dragon's Teeth, which are anti-tank fortifications that serve as a clear indication that the government fears Russia may soon come rolling through. This decision is also significant. Even going back to the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine, there are warning signs coming from the Baltic states that they believe they are next on Putin's agenda. In July 2022, LSM reported that almost 30% of Latvian civilians who count Latvian as their primary language believe that Putin will attempt to conquer the Baltic states next. Those states are not the only ones experiencing panic at this time. Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, issued a warning in July that Russia may attempt to launch an attack on Estonia within the next 5 to 7 years if the organization does not increase its collective defense spending and develop the kind of force readiness that is required to stop Russia in its tracks. If such an invasion were to occur, it would trigger Article 5 of the NATO Charter, which states that all members are obligated to come to the aid of any other member that is attacked on its own territory. In July, Rutte spoke to the New York Times and stated that
Times in July.
We have all the plans in place that if Estonia will be attacked and the Russians know this, that our reaction will be devastating.
To reiterate, it is essential to emphasize that the presence of 2 Russian jets flying into the airspace of the Baltic region does not constitute an attack. It is not fighting jargon. To put it another way, it is becoming into a more typical event. That should be a worry to everyone. Putin is attempting to acquire information about the region that many people feel he would target after Ukraine, and it appears that he is testing NATO at the same time. The Putin of Russia most certainly anticipated that NATO would intercept his Su-24 and Su-27 aircraft, but even if he did not anticipate that the Italian F-35 would be the aircraft that would do it, this will not deter him. There is a high probability that further Russian aircraft will continue to fly illegally over the Baltic region, just as there were before to the event that occurred on August 13th. A Russian leader who is trying to frighten the Baltic states while simultaneously thumbing his nose at NATO is being put through a performance-based audition. In addition to the air policing function that NATO provides for the ENOS in order to defend them, the ENOS do not have an actual air force. The F-35 intercepting Russian fighter jets in NATO airspace is a provocation, but it is not a major incident when viewed as an isolated incident. However, when viewed as part of a much larger campaign of airspace incursions and World War III rhetoric, it is possible that the Economic Times isn't as far off the mark with its inflammatory headline as it appears to be, and that World War III may in fact be on its way. There is a possibility that some people may argue that it is already taking place, and that it is merely a matter of time before the Baltic states become direct fighters. But it's possible that Putin will never have the opportunity to extend this conflict in Ukraine into the borders of NATO. This is the most significant challenge that the Russian leader's hold on power has seen in the past few decades. The whispers of a coup in Moscow explode, and Putin is on the verge of being betrayed. Learn more about what's going on in our video. And don't forget to subscribe to the Military Show for additional videos that cover the most recent events in the war between NATO and Russia.